The forest was a sight to behold, with trees swaying and dancing to the tune of the wind. Above, fluffy clouds dotted the vast sky as the sun made its daily descent into the horizon. Each tree was painted with brilliant colors, waving its branches as if beckoning June to follow them deeper into the unknown. But June's journey had been anything but easy. He had been hiking for hours without any water, his parched throat aching for even a drop. The ponds that dotted the countryside seemed unfit to drink from, teeming with potential parasites. The scorching sun only made things worse, aggravating his already existing sunburn and leaving him dehydrated and exhausted. His thoughts strayed to Valine and Brixton, the companions he had left behind in hiding. Had they managed to escape? Did Brixton receive the medical care he needed? The uncertainty weighed on June's mind, his thoughts spiraling out of control until he was startled by the sound of galloping hooves. In a panic, he dove into a nearby bush, narrowly avoiding crushing his trusty loot. As the sound of the horse's retreat faded away, with the slightest hesitation, June emerged from the bush. It felt ridiculous to hide like a criminal, but the threat of being accused of the deaths of two Elestrian knights loomed large. Just when despair threatened to overwhelm him, June spotted a stream of smoke rising above the treetops. In a world without digital maps or GPS, the simplest things often held the most valuable information. Smoke meant fire, and fire meant people. With newfound hope, June set off in the direction of the smoke, determined to find someone. With each cautious step, June moved through the thick foliage, his senses heightened by the possibility of danger lurking in the shadows. It could be his friends Valine and Brixton waiting for him, or a cold-blooded killer ready to strike at any moment. But his worries were unfounded. As he approached the source of the smoke, he saw a palisade in the distance. Another town, different from the last, with a river acting as a natural moat to protect the city walls. Following the river to the north, he found a bridge leading across. An old wooden sign greeted him. "Welcome to Niebaum." Finally, a sense of relief washed over him, and he could breathe easy for the first time in hours. June straightened his clothing, dusting off his lute and sword, preparing himself for what lay ahead. With a newfound sense of safety, he ventured into the town. However, the peaceful atmosphere was short-lived as June heard the sound of chaos erupting from the town square. People were yelling, and he could sense that something terrible was happening. His instinct was to turn around and head back to Mercia village, but it was impossible. The sun was already setting, and he was dehydrated and exhausted. He needed to find shelter for the night, and Niebaum was his best bet. As he approached the town square, June saw a well-dressed man on the front steps of a grand building, wiping sweat from his brow, while the crowd around him shouted and jeered. June couldn't care less about the commotion going on around him. All he had his sights set on was the tantalizing well, complete with a trusty bucket and rope pulley. Like a man possessed, he made haste towards the water source, his movements as swift and silent as a panther on the prowl. With deft hands, he yanked the bucket up and out of the well, savoring the cool, refreshing water quenching his parched throat. The liquid gushed down his throat like a dam bursting open, his dire thirst being quenched. Satisfied, he placed the bucket back in the well and took a moment to survey his surroundings. The villagers, embroiled in a heated argument with the noble, paid him no attention. Voices rose in anger as accusations flew, each person venting their grievances. One man's cries of, "He treats us like dogs," were met with agreement from the crowd. But the noble seemed unfazed, with a sympathetic expression on his face. "I understand your pain," he said, trying to placate the villagers. "I too have lost a brother to the Pachan dungeons, the king." But he was cut off by a woman's voice from the crowd. "He is a delusional old man chasing his own ridiculous fantasies." Her husband tried to calm her down, placing a soothing hand on her shoulder. As the argument raged on, June's attention was diverted by a sudden movement in his peripheral vision. A person was climbing up a ladder nearby. Turning his head to get a better look, June was met with a sight so gruesome it made his blood run cold. As June had entered the town from the west, his vision was blocked by homes, but now he stumbled upon an appalling sight that would haunt him for a long time. Two lifeless bodies hung from the wooden gallows, with bloody rags covering their faces. The villagers were using axes and ladders to retrieve the corpses. June's face turned pale, and his stomach lurched at the ghastly sight. Mersha village couldn't escape the Elestrian Knight's brutality, and it seemed like the town had suffered the same fate. But June had a job to do. He brushed off the gruesome scene and took a stroll through the side streets, passing by an alchemist shop, a blacksmith shop, and a stone mason. However, none of these establishments caught his attention. He was searching for a particular building, the River's Bend Tavern. As soon as he spotted the sign, his face lit up with a smile. He entered the tavern, grabbed a linen cap from the hat rack, and began to play his lute. The crowd was light, as most of the villagers were busy shaking their fists in anger. June was patient. Within 10 minutes, a few villagers entered the establishment seeking to lighten their mood. As time passed, June's music mesmerized more and more as the crowd began to flow in. Entranced by his music, the tavern filled with people as he earned a considerable sum in his borrowed linen hat. To top it off, one of the women in the bar couldn't take her eyes off him, and her seductive gaze only fueled his performance. After several hours of playing, the bar exploded with cheers and applause, and June basked in the adulation of his mini-celebrity status. He counted his earnings, which amounted to more than 30 coins, and decided to buy himself a meal and a drink. But before he could place his order, a barmaid handed him a pint of mead and said, "Your coin is no good here. You drink for free." She flashed him a quick wink and went back to her work. June was flattered by the gesture. He was humbled by their gratitude and kindness. June's heart swelled as he took a sip of the sweet alcoholic nectar before him. He savored the drink, enjoying the subtle notes of honey that lingered on his tongue. As he sat there, lost in his thoughts, a stranger approached him. The man introduced himself. "Hey, pal, I am a fellow bard like yourself. You play very well for your age." June nodded in thanks, trying to maintain his humble demeanor. However, his peace was soon shattered as the bard's grip tightened on his shoulder in almost a violent manner. June's body tensed, ready to pull away, but he managed to stay composed. The bard leaned in close and spoke. "You know, I have heard countless songs from all over, but I have never heard a single song of yours. Explain to me how that is even possible?" Before June could respond, a second hand landed on the bard's shoulder, and a familiar voice interrupted their conversation. "Hands off, peasant. Haven't you heard of the legendary June of high school? You dare lay your filthy hands on him?" The crowd quieted as they expected a brawl to break out. The bard turned to see a Cambrian warrior gripping his shoulder with murder in her eyes. Realizing he was facing a beat down, the bard removed his hand from June's shoulder. He stumbled around his words as he replied, "I meant no offense." The bard walked away with his pride, as Valine glared at him with a level of animosity that could cause a small fire. June shot a smile at her, grateful for her intervention. Valine had always been his biggest supporter, and her presence filled him with warmth. June turned to Valine, arm outstretched for a hug, but she put one hand on his forehead, stopping him in his tracks. "What are you doing?" she asked, holding his back with one hand. Regaining his footing, June wiped the clay off his face and said, "Sorry, I forgot. You hate being touched." He handed her a drink, saying, "Let's go have a seat." Perched in the back of the dingy tavern, June glanced out the window, savoring the last glimmers of the sun's descent into the horizon. He had lost track of time as he had been playing his lute for what seemed like hours. But now he turned to Valine and regaled her with a tale of two valiant Elestrian knights and a mystical Snophis elk that saved his life. Eager to hear the latest news, June prodded Valine with a question. "What happened after I left? Is Brixton all right?" But her reply was devoid of any emotion, and her words struck him like a hammer blow. "He died," she said, showing no emotion. June's face fell, a cloud of sorrow descending upon him. "Oh, I'm sorry," he stammered as shame washed over him, but Valine was quick to remind him of the harsh reality of their existence. "What did you expect?" she retorted. "We were in the middle of the forest. Humans die when they cut their vital organs. That's why you need my protection, remember?" Feeling a sense of unease, June shifted the conversation to the recent events in the village. "The Elestrian Knights were here this morning," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They killed 2 people. I saw the aftermath when I got here." Valine remained unmoved, her lack of empathy unsettling to June. "Sounds terrible," she said, as if commenting on the weather. "How much coin have you made so far? Let me see what you got." With an inward sigh, June produced his earnings and spread them out on the table. Valine's deft fingers counted them up in a flash. "Not bad," she remarked, a glint of greed in her eye. "You got more in you? The night is young and there's always more coin to be made." With a nod, June finished his drink and gathered his loot. As he played, the tavern-goers cheered and clapped, their appreciation fueling his energy. But as the hours passed and the crowd dwindled, June grew tired. He checked on Valine, only to find her passed out amidst a pile of empty mugs. Putting down his loot, June stretched his weary limbs and made his way to the bar. The barkeep offered him another drink, but June declined, his body and mind at their limit. "No thanks," he said with hesitation. "I'm maxed out for tonight." The barkeep pulled the glass away and shot back. "Dat music of yours brought in more peeps than I've seen on the normal. And besides, everyone's boiling over. Full of anger today. Bit of music seemed fitting to me." June struggled to comprehend the barkeep's thick accent and responded, "Yes, people were rightfully upset. Why were the knights going door to door?" The barkeep paused for a moment, then whispered, "The king orders his butchers in our peaceful neck of the woods, tearing apart people's homes, destroying their livelihoods. Caden and his wife had enough, sick and tired of it all, and they paid for it." With a solemn nod, the barkeep poured himself a stiff drink, raised it up to the heavens, and downed it in one gulp. With no more words to share, the barkeep went back to scrubbing his mugs. He kept a raging storm of anger simmering behind his cool demeanor. June could see it in his eyes. The barkeep was just as furious as the rest of the townsfolk. He just kept it bottled up inside. The two of them sat in silence until a loud crash shattered the peace. Valine had tumbled out of her chair and lay sprawled on the ground, surrounded by empty mugs. Rummaging in his pocket, June fished out a coin, placed it on the counter, and asked, "Do you have a bed for the night?" Shaking his head, the barkeep muttered, "Nah, don't worry about it. You stay for free." June gave him a grateful smile and said, "It's for her." June rose from his bar stool with determination, marching over to Valine and seizing her by the shoulders. He put all his strength into trying to flip her over, but all he managed was to roll her from her side onto her back. Huffing and puffing, he backed away and took a deep breath. The barkeep chuckled at June's attempt and warned him, "You best be careful, lad. That Cambrian ain't no featherweight. She's a solid 300 pounds or more." June stretched his sore muscles and conceded, "You're right. She can stay here for the night." With that, he gathered his hat filled with coins and headed towards the communal sleeping quarters. Candlelight filled the room, muted only by the sound of snoring travelers. June found an empty bunk and kicked off his shoes before collapsing onto the mattress. He was exhausted after a long day of performing. His rest was short-lived as he was abruptly awakened by Valine's rough slaps. "Get up, lazy. We've got business to attend to." Groaning in protest, June shielded his face from Valine's blows. All right, I'm up," he grumbled. But as he opened his eyes, he was blinded by the bright sunlight streaming through the curtains. Valine wasted no time in scolding him. "It's noon already, and we have a long journey ahead of us. Rest is for the weak, remember?" As Valine dragged him out of bed, she caught a whiff of his musty clothing. Valine wrinkled her nose in disgust, tugging him towards the door. "By the gods, how long have you been wearing those rags?" June was too dazed to respond, stumbling along behind her barefoot as they left the sleeping quarters behind. He didn't have a chance to bid farewell to the bar staff before they were off on their next adventure. In the bustling town square, Valine set June free from her grip and seized him with a stern gaze. "Listen up, mate. Now that you've got the coin, it's high time you stopped looking like a scruffy cur. Head over to that tailor shop and get yourself spruced up. While you're at it, stop by the bathhouse too." Before June could protest, Valine pushed him forward. "Trust me, the better you look, the more they'll pay for your tunes," she said, pointing her finger towards the tailoring shop. June, glancing down at his bare feet, made a feeble request. "I left my shoes in the tavern?" Valine shot back without skipping a beat. Buy new ones. An hour passed as June returned, dressed to kill. With a brand new ensemble, June spotted Valine waiting for him with his lute, strumming away. She sized him up with a critical eye, inspecting his fresh clothes as if she were the fashion police. June had swapped his tattered clothes for a pristine white cotton shirt, ankle-banded trousers, a leather belt, and a pair of Saxon boots. After a few seconds, Valine gave a nod of approval and declared, "Not exactly combat ready, but it'll do the trick for a bard like you. So, how do you like it?" June adjusted his trousers and replied, "I feel like I'm ready to join a Renaissance fair." Valine cocked her head in confusion and asked, "What's a Renaissance?" June strapped his lute to his back and quipped, "Ah, it's a time long ago when folks used to wear clothes like this and went about hacking each other with swords." "Sounds like fun!" Valine exclaimed as she handed June his sword and sheath. "Our next destination is Fort Gates, where we'll find a bunch of military bigwigs with deep pockets just begging to be emptied by a skilled entertainer. Let's get going." As they made their way out of town, June couldn't help but notice the looming gallows and asked, what kind of heartless leader would order his own knights to slaughter innocent people? Valine shot him a cautionary glance before responding, "Careful with your words, my friend. Despite the common practice of bad-mouthing the king, it's still illegal to do so." Once they were out of earshot, Valine let out a bitter chuckle and continued, "Everyone knows that the king is nothing but a doddering old fool with not a shred of rationality left in his empty noggin. When he bites the dust, all he'll leave behind is an empty throne and a legacy of tyranny." June was entirely shocked by Valine's words, but before he could process them fully, he asked, "What's this I hear about the king chasing his own delusion?" Valine rolled her eyes and snorted, "Delusions? I am not sure. He's probably seeing the ghosts of all the poor souls who've died under his oppressive rule. I wouldn't be surprised if he's got a whole graveyard of skeletons in his closet." June couldn't help but laugh at Valine's witty retort and remarked, "I can see you're not his biggest fan, are you?" Valine stood tall, her spear glinting in the sunlight, as she brandished it in the air with a fierce determination. "Leadership," she proclaimed, her voice ringing with authority, "is about lifting your people up, not tearing them down. I hate that." Puzzled by her words, June quipped, "Sounds like you know from experience?" Valine returned her spear to its holster with a fluid motion, her eyes flashing with a steely glint. "My clan leader back in Cambria, he was a filthy man, not worth his grit. He used to tell me I was young, stupid, and full of anger. He said I'd make a terrible warrior. He'd say it every day in training, until the day I put my spear through his lying mouth." June's eyes widened in shock. "So you killed him?" Valine let out a throaty laugh, shaking her head in amusement. "Nah, Cambrian warriors don't go down that easily. Most wounds inflicted on human flesh are fatal, but not on us." She reached out and pinched June's forearm, causing him to wince in pain. Even the deadliest blows on clay skin can be healed. It just takes a long time. June still looked confused. "So, how long does it take to heal a cut?" Valine shrugged. "Depends on the cut. Minor ones can take 2 weeks. Nasty cuts can take a month or longer. But deep cuts? Those can take 6 months to a year." June nodded slowly, trying to wrap his head around the concept of Cambrian anatomy. "So, did your instructor change his ways after you attacked him?" Valine shook her head, her expression darkening. "I wouldn't know. I was banished for attacking a clan leader. I can never go back. But I'm sure he's still the same monster he always was." As they walked, a hush fell over them, like a heavy blanket smothering their conversation. But then, like a bolt of lightning, June shattered the silence with a thought-provoking question. "So we are the same, you and I, wanderers?" Valine was caught off guard, her body flinching, hearing his words. With a snort of disbelief, she retorted, "Not even close. I'm a mercenary with a kill count to rival any seasoned fighter. You, my friend, are a peculiar one. I haven't said anything because we're pals and all, but who travels without a water canteen or a money pouch? Where's your traveler's pack or your hat to protect you from the scorching sun?" June was at a loss for words, his mind scrambling to come up with a believable excuse. "I lost my hat in a wolf attack the other day. he lied through his teeth. Valine wasn't buying it, her skepticism palpable as she continued to critique him. "You're missing the basics of survival, my dear friend. Who taught you how to survive in the wild? It's like they only taught you how to play a tune on your instrument." But June refused to let her mockery get the best of him. He stood his ground, determined to prove his worth. "That's not true. I learned everything I was taught. English, math, science, and even algebra like everyone else." Valine was clearly taken aback, her face a mask of confusion. "What's an algebra?" she asked, to which June had no answer. Not one to dwell on the past, Valine moved on. "Regardless of what you learned, at least you can play music. Now let me fill you in on the plan." For 2 days straight, June and Valine roamed the winding roads that linked one town to the next, a duo of travelers playing their music in every tavern they could find. What started as a measly sum of 30 coins quickly snowballed into 80, then 200. June couldn't help but admit that Valine was right. Their music was worth big bucks in this world, without modern distractions like TV, internet, or sports. Despite June's skepticism, Valine's plan worked like a charm. As the sun began to set, most folks retreated to their homes or gathered in the local tavern for some drinks and gossip. That was when June and Valine would pounce, playing music so bewitching that patrons couldn't help but sit back, listen, and toss coins into their collection. They were like Pied Pipers, leading the townsfolk on a merry dance with their melodies. Back home, June could never book a gig at the local club with his below-average musical talents. But out here, in this uncharted world, his skills were considered exceptional. Sometimes June caught whispers from the drunken crowds, curious about who he was and where he came from. That was when Valine stepped in as his promoter, spinning tales of the legendary June of high school and shooing away any nosy or unwanted attention. They played late into the night, lulling drunks to sleep with the sweet sounds of music. In the mornings, they slept in until noon, before packing up and setting off to the next town over. June tried his best to keep track of where they had been, but everything was so new and unfamiliar that it all blurred together. Today, as they walked under cloudy skies, June felt the need to break the silence. "Bad weather rolling in?" he asked Valine, hoping to spark a conversation. Valine smirked at June's reluctance to buy a hat as she said, "Yes, and I hope you like getting wet." Undeterred, June asked, "Valine, what are you going to do with all your money? I mean, what are you hoping to accomplish in life?" This time Valine didn't hold back as she replied, "You sound like my mother just now. Plan for the future. Stop playing with the boys. Learn how to sew, blah." June realized his mistake and tried to rephrase his question. Without asking, she answered, "The truth is, I would start my own band of mercenaries. My own clan. We would only allow in the best of the best. We would take on jobs during the day and drink all night." With a nod, June said, "That sounds pretty good, but wouldn't it be fun to go back to Cambria and show everyone how you weren't a failure?" Thinking of home, June smiled. "I would go home if I could. I miss my family and friends. I miss society, my car, iced coffee, and my own bed. I would like to eat something, anything, without killing it first. That's all I want." Valine's head was spinning with confusion as she tried to wrap her mind around what June was saying. She retorted, "I am not going to pretend like I know what half of that stuff is. But how does your people eat something without killing it first? Are they cannibals?" As they continued down the path, Valine's attention was drawn to a wall made of dark wood up ahead. As if driven by instinct, she grabbed June by the back of his shirt and brought him to a halt. Something was not right. Without hesitation, Valine armed herself with her spear and shield. Her calm and collected demeanor shifted to one of fierce determination. After determining the threat, she said, "What is this all about? The tree people are setting up barricades now? None of this was here the last time I traveled this road." As June looked on, Valine approached the wall with caution. He couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Who were these tree people, and why did they need to barricade themselves off from the rest of the world? Suddenly, a deep voice boomed out from the other side of the wall. "That's close enough. What is your name and purpose?" Valine's heart raced as she prepared to face whatever lay ahead. She announced herself as Valine of Cambria, making it clear that she meant no harm to anyone. June couldn't help but admire Valine's bravery in the face of the unknown. With a screeching creak, the colossal wooden gate groaned open, revealing a frigid manor beyond. A voice, unseen yet commanding in tone, reverberated through the air. "Sheathe your weapons and cause no trouble within our presence," it boomed. June and Valine exchanged a meaningful look, silently acknowledging the gravity of the situation. Valine slung her spear and shield over her back, motioning for June to follow her lead. As they approached the gate, June couldn't help but notice the telltale signs of recent construction: upturned dirt, the smell of cut wood, and a frenzy of activity within the walls. But nothing could have prepared him for what he saw next. Towering before him were two humanoid figures, twice June's size, with lanky limbs, bony joints, and an otherworldly appearance that was almost alien. The only difference was their skin, rough as bark and covered in a wild tangle of hair that flowed down their backs like a waterfall of wood shavings. June's eyes scanned their armor, a mix of thick timber breastplates and leather straps, wooden shields, and long rapier-like swords. As they entered the camp, Valine was on a mission to find someone, while June couldn't help but take in the sights and sounds of the bustling community. He saw a dozen makeshift tents, constructed from leaves and sticks, and wagons overflowing with fencing materials and tools. But before he could take in any more of his surroundings, Valine's booming voice shattered the silence. "Neris, how have you been?" As Valine and June approached, a tree person paused from his work and turned towards them, a mischievous grin spreading across his features. With a deep drawn-out voice, he greeted her. Well, look who's back, the little clay girl herself. And who's this you've brought with you?" Neris couldn't help but chuckle as he poked June in the stomach. Valine's question was direct and to the point. "What's going on here, Neris? Have you all grown tired of living in the forest?" Neris sighed and ran a hand through his luscious locks, his expression heavy with regret. "Oh, how I wish we were still in the forest, in the loving embrace of the mother oak. But alas, we've been given orders to secure the roads west and south of the Romasian forest." Valine's curiosity was piqued. "Who gave you these orders?" With a flick of his finger, Neris gestured towards a cluster of cloth tents in the corner of the encampment. "Those Alestrian knights over yonder. They're the ones calling the shots, making us chop down trees and build these blasted walls." Valine's eyes blazed with fury as she whipped around to face Neris, her voice dripping to a whisper with disgust. "What? The tree people groveling at the feet of the king's butchers now? I can hardly stomach it." A high-pitched voice pierced the tense silence. June turned to see a man sauntering towards them with an air of superiority, hands tucked behind his back in a nonchalant manner. His crisp uniform contrasted sharply with the ragged attire of the tree people. His voice was icy and calculated as he sneered, "Butchers. Indeed, the term butcher reeks of the stench of your kind." Valine and June stood frozen, stunned by the audacity of this self-righteous intruder. Neris towered over the group, his eyes narrowing as he demanded, "Constable, what do you want?" The constable's gaze swept over the trio with a condescending smirk, before settling on Neris. "Tell me, soldier," he drawled, "what compels your comrades to welcome these marauders into our sanctuary?" June stepped forward, attempting to defuse the situation with his most regal tone. "Forgive us, good sir. We did not mean to tread on your sacred ground. We will leave at once." With that, he took Valine's arm and began walking towards the eastern gate. But their escape was cut short when the constable barked, "Detain them!" Neris hesitated for a moment, but the constable's imperious tone brooked no argument. "Perhaps the leaves in your ears have deafened you," he snarled. "I said detain them." In an instant, Neris and his cohorts sprang into action, surrounding June and Valine with deadly weapons drawn. Valine's hand hovered over her spear, but she knew they were outnumbered and outmatched. It was a losing battle. June leaned in towards her and whispered, "Fear not, for the pen is mightier than the sword. Let's talk our way out of this mess." 3 more burly tree people emerged from the shadows, encircling them with sharp blades glinting in the sunlight. June threw his hands up in surrender as the constable sauntered over, eyeing him with suspicion. Naris and the others backed away, leaving June to face the music alone. "What is thy name, criminal?" the constable demanded, his voice low and menacing. June flashed a grin, hoping to smooth things over. "Criminal? Oh no, my good sir. You must be mistaken. I'm just a humble traveler passing through these parts. The name's June." But the constable was not impressed. "I can discern the identity of a criminal upon laying my gaze upon them," he growled, snatching June's sword from its sheath. "This exquisite blade hath been wielded by a valiant knight of our king. Do tell, how didst thou come to possess such a distinguished weapon?" June's heart sank as he realized the gravity of the situation. He couldn't deny it any longer. He was in deep trouble. "Well, you see, it's a funny story," he began, trying to think of a way out of this desperate situation. "I stumbled upon an ancient battlefield and everyone was already dead, so—" The constable was having none of it. "Shouldst thou have acquired said item by the unlawful act of theft, you shall be subject to a penal sentence of 5 months' incarceration. Conversely, should you have procured the sword through the act of grave robbing, of a royal servant no less, your penal sentence is extended to 1 year imprisonment. Might you be inclined to alter your plea?" June swallowed hard and said nothing at all. He was stumped. Valine elbowed him in the side and whispered, "Still think you can talk your way out of this one?" A few moments later, June found himself in a living nightmare as the Elestrian knights pounced on him like a pack of hungry wolves. They stripped him of everything he owned, leaving him with nothing but the clothes on his back. The sound of metal clanging echoed through the air as they hammered pins into his shackles with a ball-peen hammer. As he was loaded into the 2-wheeled prison cart, June's heart sank like a stone. He was headed for a long stay in a medieval dungeon, but he refused to give up hope. Nearby, Valine was putting up a valiant fight, trying everything in her power to save her friend. She pleaded with the constable, using every trick in the book to try and convince him of June's innocence. "He's mentally ill," she cried. "He couldn't steal a sword if his life depended on it. He was raised by wolves, for goodness' sake." Despite her best efforts, the constable remained unmoved, and Valine was forced to admit defeat. She walked over to the wagon and delivered the bad news to June with a heavy heart. "No luck," she sighed. "In hindsight, I guess we should have gone around." June couldn't help but chuckle at Valine's nonchalant attitude. It was almost as if she didn't realize the gravity of the situation they were in. But as the cart lurched forward and began its bumpy journey, June's thoughts turned dark once more. "I don't even know where they're taking me," he muttered. "Maybe I'll just starve to death on the way there." Valine rolled her eyes, but there was a hint of sarcasm in her voice as she replied, "That's the spirit. Keep it up, and your sentence will be over in no time." The cart rocked back and forth as one of the Elestrian knights hooked up the horse to the front. June couldn't help but wonder what horrors awaited him at the end of this journey. Valine let out a mischievous grin as she shouted at the Elestrian knight, "Hey, where exactly are you taking him? I am not trying to start trouble or anything. I was just wondering, when his sentence is over, where should I go to pick him up?" The knight was hesitant for a second. Then he answered her, "North by northwest, Castle Pachan outside of the village of Knolt." "Thank you, good sir," Valine said with a smile to the knight. She turned back to June and whispered, "You got it made. Pachan is the easiest place to break out of." June's hopes fluttered as he grabbed the bars of his cage. He replied, "Really?" Shooting him down, Valine answered, "No, that place is terrible." As Valine finished her joke, she looked over at June, expecting at least a chuckle or a grin. But to her disappointment, his face remained stone cold. She fidgeted with her hands for a moment before finally breaking the silence. "All joking aside, it's been great talking to you," she said, her voice softening with sincerity. "I'm really going to miss these little chats we've been having." Just then, the Elestrian knight beckoned over a couple of tree people, including Neras, and barked out some orders to them. June's heart sank as he realized his time was almost up. With a heavy heart, he reached out to say his final goodbye to Valine. She held up her left hand through the bars, and June went to grasp it with his right. but something caught him off guard. As their hands met, he felt a sharp object in hers. His smile faded as he looked at her with a mix of confusion and fear. With a sudden jolt, June was thrown off balance as the Elestrian knight slapped the horses behind with a resounding, "Heya!" June scrambled to regain his footing, pulling himself back into the wagon with a grunt. He cast a quick glance at his hand, where he had clutched a small metal file covered in clay. A precious lifeline she had hidden within her hand for emergencies. It was a symbol of hope, a reminder that he was not completely powerless. As the day wore on and the sun began its descent, June sat in the back of the prison wagon, attempting to file at his shackles with the small tool. But the noise was too loud, and he didn't want to alert his captors. Instead, he slipped the file into his pocket and surveyed his surroundings. The two tree people walked alongside the horse, bickering about the paltry rations they had been given. But June remained hopeful. For the first time in his life, he had all the time in the world. With a sudden burst of courage, June steadied himself and climbed to his feet. His shackles dangled as he held onto the bars for support. Though his attempts at escape had failed so far, he still had his words. Clearing his throat, he addressed Neras. "Excuse me, can I ask a question?" Both of his captures were as still as walking statues, their stony silence an unnerving presence in the cramped confines of June's cage. Not one to be deterred, June decided to try and provoke a reaction out of them. With a sly smile, he leaned forward and addressed the pair. "You know, I've heard a lot about you two. I thought everyone in the Ramasian forest was friendly. Maybe we can be friends. I mean, sure, you take orders from the king, but you still like us humans, right?" Neras's face twisted into a sneer as he shot June a withering glare. June could almost sense the heat of his anger searing through the metal bars. But he wasn't done yet. When things turn around in this country, the tree people will get the respect they deserve. If you are lucky, they won't be remembered as the slaves of the kingdom. With a flash of steel, Neras drew his sword and plunged it through the bars of June's cage. The blade narrowly missed his arm, sending shivers down his spine. The rapier tore through the front of the cage, passed through the back, and clanged against the bars on the other side. June was speechless, his eyes wide with shock. Neras's voice was low and menacing as he growled, "Killing you would save us a long trip. So, mind your tongue, prisoner. Don't use our name and those filthy scum in the same breath, understand?" With a sinking feeling in his stomach, June realized he had gone too far, but he couldn't help but be curious. "Why would you work for the knights if you hate the king?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Neras stepped closer to the cage, looming over June with an intense expression. "This is the lesser of two evils," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "We sacrifice ourselves for our people, for our future. If we resist, the king will burn our forest down. What choice do we really have?" June sensed that there was more to Neras's story than he was letting on. "All we have is time," he said. "Want to talk about it?" Neras let out a deep, rumbling laugh and returned to his position next to the horse. June had missed his chance, but he still had hope. After all he had was time. As the caravan rolled on for an hour, the scorching sun beat down on them with unrelenting intensity. Sweat dripped from their brows, and their horses' coats were lathered with perspiration. The group stopped in the cool shade of a massive maple tree to take a breather. Neras rummaged through his leather pouch, retrieving a cloth-wrapped bundle that he unrolled to reveal a verdant pastry of unknown origin. The second guard's face twisted in frustration as he eyed the measly loaf. "Is this all they could scrounge up for two grown men?" He spat on the ground. His annoyance was visible for all to see. Neras gestured toward the surrounding forest and said with a hint of anger, "I suppose we'll have to hunt for our own food. I'll keep an eye on the prisoner. You go run down something decent to eat." Without waiting for a response, he took off into the woods like a bolt of lightning, his long hair streaming behind him in the wind. As Neras gathered firewood, June took the opportunity to strike up a conversation. "You and I both know Valine, huh? That's cool. How did you meet her?" Neras replied with a scowl, "You talk too much. No wonder you get along with Valine. She's just as chatty." June fell silent, realizing that hunger made even the friendliest conversation a challenge. Naras reached into his knapsack and produced an odd-looking red rock. Stepping away from the wood pile, he tossed the rock in and backed away. The rock exploded into a brilliant blaze, quickly engulfing the wood in flames. June gaped in amazement. What in the world was that? Did you just use magic? With an angry tone, Naras shot back, Magic? Ha! We don't bother with the nonsense of sorcery. We live in harmony with the land, not like your kind. As his partner sauntered out of the woods with a rabbit in hand, June had to act fast. Time was running out to get the information he needed about the elusive red rock. So, he cut straight to the chase, saying, Relax, I'm not from this place. I know nothing. I will be quiet if you tell me about the red rock. Naras, complacent by June's direct approach, dug into his bag and produced a mundane red rock. He explained, This is sap from the pyrus tree, which is harmless to hold, but cracking the dry outer shell can release the spirit of fire. June listened with intensity, trying to soak up every detail. But before he could say another word, his partner interrupted, shouting about the arrival of their dinner. As they cooked and ate their meal, June sat quietly in his cage, observing his captors with cautious curiosity. Naras commented about it being a nice day to sit within the shadow of nature. With a smooth grin, June offered to entertain his captors. I could play some music for you guys, if I had my lute. Seeing hesitation in their eyes, June added, Come on, it's harmless. With the slightest apprehension, Naras rummaged through the bag, only to fumble the lute and send it crashing to the ground, snapping a string. The twang of the strings was its dying breath and an echo of pain to June. Naras's partner cackled with malicious glee as June's heart ached. But Naras wasn't about to let June suffer alone. He retrieved the instrument from the ground and strode towards the cage, handing over the lute in one swift motion. With a critical eye, June inspected the instrument for any signs of damage. While one string was gone, the lute was still intact. June's shackles were a hindrance, but he didn't waste a moment. He seized the lute and began to strum out a beautiful melody. Naras couldn't help but grin as the music filled the air, and even his partner appeared to be enjoying himself. For a while, the three of them simply sat there, enraptured by the sweet sound of June's music. June knew that tree people weren't above being cruel to prisoners. They would have no qualms about mocking him if they didn't like his performance. But by the third song, both of them had risen to his feet, swaying to the rhythm. When they eventually packed up and resumed their journey, Naras elected to let June keep his lute. June serenaded them on the way to their destination. As the day wore on and the sun began to set, June continued to strum his lute, keeping his mind off the impending doom that awaited him. In the distance, a towering castle loomed, casting a dark shadow over the landscape. June knew that dungeons were places of unspeakable horror, but he refused to let himself dwell on such grim thoughts. When they arrived at the castle's moat, a voice boomed down at them, demanding to know their identity. Naras identified himself as Romasian Infantry Battalion, transporting a prisoner from the 27th checkpoint. Despite the interruption, June kept playing his lute, only pausing to slip Valine's metal file between his right-hand fingers. June feared that once he stopped playing, the guards would likely take his beloved instrument away, perhaps forever. As the drawbridge creaked open with a metallic screech, June couldn't help but shudder a tinge of dread. The heavy chains of the bridge clung in the wind, creating an eerie symphony as the caravan made its way across the moat. But as June's eyes landed on the castle, his fear momentarily turned to awe. This was nothing like the old rundown castles he had seen in history class or on the internet. This was a fortress, with walls stretching higher than the trees and archery positions ready for any potential attack. The floors were immaculate, and the few visible guards were hidden within their watchtowers. As the caravan came to a halt, two men with torches waited to receive them. Most of the men were dressed in standard clothing, but one man stood out in a military-styled uniform that strained to contain his protruding belly. Naras handed over the keys and a paper scroll to the overweight man. His name is June, Naras said, and he is to serve 5 months in isolation per the constable's orders. The overweight man took the torch from his companion and opened the scroll, his eyes scanning the words carefully. June took the opportunity to try and win over the prison guard with his musical prowess. He strummed on his guitar, belting out the only appropriate song he could think of, Jailhouse Rock. The onlookers watched in fascination as June played, and it seemed to be working. He only needed a bit more time to win the guard over to his side. The overweight man lumbered back with a jangle of keys in his sweaty palm. With practiced ease, he spun the tumblers on the lock while delivering a message to Neris. Make sure your higher-ups know that you've handed off your responsibility to Warden Isaacs. As the door to the cage creaked open, the warden snatched the loot out of June's grasp before the final cord had a chance to ring out. He bellowed with a voice as gruff as gravel. Music is a tool for bards and harlots. Here in Castle Pashan, you'll do your time in silence or face the consequences. Do you understand? June sat there, shell-shocked and speechless. Before he could utter a word, the warden barked orders at his subordinates. Take the prisoner away. The vile guards hoisted June up by his legs and dragged him out of the cage. The warden signaled to another guard, who patted June down and checked his restraints before tossing his shoes aside. As the prison wagon turned around to leave, the warden and his henchmen led June down into the bowels of the castle. The scent that hit June's nostrils was putrid, a mix of spoiled food and decaying flesh. It was the stench of death. The unlit passageways concealed horrors that June didn't even want to imagine. June's loot was never far out of sight, as the warden still clutched it in his hand. If he was lucky, maybe he'd be allowed to keep it in his cell. As they marched along, the warden outlined the prison's rules. Every prisoner under my watch gets 1 meal per day. If you don't have your bowl at the feeding slot, come morning, you will go hungry. And if you cause any trouble for myself or my guards, you'll be chained to the walls. June took stock of his surroundings, studying the walls and memorizing the winding passageways. Soon enough, they reached a solid iron door with a tiny slot at the bottom for food. This was to be his cell. With a groan of metal, the door screeched open. June entered the cramped, foul-smelling cell and was greeted by the pitiful sight of a gaunt man chained to the wall with a rusty bolt. The stench of excrement permeated the air, making his stomach churn with disgust. The warden strode in, eyeing the prisoner with disdain. Still clinging to life, Garant? He sneered, not bothering to wait for a response before turning to June. Welcome to your new home, boy. June mustered up the courage to make a request, hoping to salvage some modicum of sanity during his imprisonment. Excuse me, sir. I know you don't owe me any favors, but could I please have my loot? It would help the time pass. To his surprise, the warden held out his arm to hand him the instrument. However, before June could take it from him, the warden slammed it into the wall, shattering it into pieces. The twisted smile on the warden's face made it clear that he took pleasure in crushing June's hopes. Sorry, lad. There are no happy endings in this place. He chuckled as he and the guards exited the cell, leaving June to his fate. In the deafening silence that followed, June collected the remnants of his beloved loot, his only source of solace in this wretched place. Surveying his surroundings, he found a window barely large enough to fit his hand, offering a glimpse of the outside world. Through it, he saw the last rays of the sun disappearing over the horizon, a stark reminder of the freedom he had lost. Turning his attention to his cellmate, June took in the sight of a broken man with one eye gouged out. His outfit was nothing but rags of filth, attempted to make conversation, hoping to find some comfort in their shared misery. Looks like it's just you, me, and my broken loot. Can you speak? He asked, hoping for a sliver of human connection in this inhumane place. With a gentle nod, Garant whispered his affirmation. Yes, as if his vocal cords were made of delicate glass. The gloomy dungeon was a dismal place, a pit of despair where even the air felt heavy with the weight of suffering. June, curious and perhaps seeking a morsel of companionship in this wretchedness, probed Garant with a question. How long have you been here? Garant, his energy reserves depleted, kept his response succinct. I'm not even sure anymore. The question that followed was expected, but still stung like salt on an open wound. What did you do to get chained to the wall? Garant's response came without hesitation. I called the warden a fat sack. A flicker of amusement danced across June's face at the words. even in these grave circumstances. Garant's chuckle was brief, but the cough that followed hinted at the harshness of their imprisonment. June tried to lighten the mood. "That's a good one." I guess he didn't approve. Garant's nod was a silent admission. Curiosity got the best of June, and he wanted to know why Garant was here. "What are you in for?" Garant's reply was a dagger to the heart. "I am a political prisoner. Someone they couldn't control. So now I am a prisoner with no voice. That is my fate." June, who had been forthcoming about his own plight, was left speechless by Garant's response. It was a reminder that in this dark, damp dungeon, they were at the mercy of a tyrant who brooked no dissent. Garant's fate was a sobering reminder of the stakes of challenging authority and the consequences of not bowing to the king's will. As the last rays of light slipped through the window, June and Garant engaged in some idle chatter, trying to distract themselves from the bleakness of their surroundings. June made his way to a corner, propping himself against the wall. He flipped Valine's file around in his hand for a bit, but the cramped and uncomfortable cell made it difficult to drift off to sleep. After a while, exhaustion finally overtook June, and he found himself transported to his home in his dreams. He was in the midst of washing his car with a buddy when an earthquake struck, and the ground gave way beneath him, plunging him into darkness. With a jolt, he awoke in a cold sweat, only to realize that he was still trapped in his prison cell with Garant chained up nearby. The light of day trickled in through the window, casting a wan glow on their bleak surroundings. June searched for his file, which had slipped from his grasp in his slumber. After retrieving it from the ground, he examined his cellmate for the first time in daylight. Garant was a scruffy, middle-aged man, his face scarred and disfigured, with a gruesome hole where his right eye should have been. Garant was still asleep, so June kept as quiet as possible, desperate not to disturb his uneasy slumber. His curiosity piqued by an iron grate that covered a small hole in the floor, June yanked on the bars with all his might, but they refused to budge. Without opening his remaining eye, Garant muttered, "That's the outhouse, mate. The one and only place where shit goes down around here." June let out a deep sigh of disgust as he released the grime-covered bars. "Yeah, I see that now," he muttered to himself, wiping his palms on his pants before slumping down on the ground. Suddenly there was a loud clang as the metal food slot at the bottom of the door slid open, revealing a bowl of unappetizing brown mush and a cup of water. June rose to his feet, picking up the pitiful meal and inspecting it with disgust. It looked like some kind of slop made from whatever scraps the guards could find. And there was no spoon or fork to be found. Before he could even take a bite, the food slot slammed shut with a jarring force. June glanced over at his cellmate, Garant, and asked in a bewildered tone, What is this?" Garant let out a grim chuckle. "The guards call it grunk. It's a mixture of vegetables and Junek. It's not gourmet, but it's all we're gonna get in this dump." June frowned as he glanced back and forth between the bowl of grunk and Garant. "Only one bowl for the both of us? That's so stingy." Garant's response caught June off guard. "Oh, they stopped feeding me days ago," he said, a note of bitterness creeping into his voice. Despite his own hunger, June didn't hesitate to pass the bowl over to Garant. Then he pulled out a small metal file from his pocket and held it up to Garant. "You're not going to rot away in here without a fight. Help me and we can break out of here together." Garant's eyes widened in disbelief as he accepted the bowl of grunk, shoveling it into his mouth with trembling hands. June could see the hope glimmering in his cellmate's eyes, but just as June began to file away at his shackles, Garant corrected him. "Not there. The bolt. Cut through the bolt, and the hinge will do the rest. Then we can slip them on and off with ease." June nodded, a newfound determination filling him. He had a plan, and he was going to see it through. Together, they would escape this wretched place and be free. Garant was in dire need of healing and nourishment, and June selflessly shared his own rations with him and nursed him back to health over the course of several days. After removing his own, June worked to remove Garant's restraints. His arms burned with exhaustion, but June saw the potential in Garant. He had knowledge of the prison's layout and routines, of the guards that suppressed them. With Garant's knowledge and June's skills, They concocted a daring plan to escape their confinement. They took the meager remains of a lute and, with the help of the file, transformed it into a sharp spike. It was a grueling process that took days, but their determination never wavered. The day of their escape arrived. June understood the risk was high, but he was willing to take it for his freedom. When the food slot opened, he deceived the guards by shouting, "Garant is dead. He's going to stink up the whole building." The air was thick with tension as June waited against the cold, unforgiving prison wall. A heavy silence hung in the air, punctuated only by the metallic click of the food slot closing shut. June's heart pounded with fear, unsure of what would come next. Time passed as June waited with bated breath. Suddenly, the sound of a creaking cart echoed through the hallway, growing louder and louder until it reached the cell and stopped. The door lock clicked several times, and soon after the door creaked open as two imposing guards appeared. Entering the cell club in hand, the first guard barked, "Turn around against the wall, prisoner. Don't move or we will have two bodies to haul out of here." His eyes narrowed and cold. The guard's words were callous and cruel, but compassion was a luxury no one could afford in this place. Turning around, June felt the chill of cold stones on his face as he pressed himself against the wall. He knew better than to test them, lest the trap was sprung too early. The first guard kept watch on June as the second guard unrolled a long white cloth bag. He kneeled down and eyed Garant's body still hanging from his chains. "Rotten scoundrel. Serves him right," he said as he pulled the keys from his pocket. Garant remained frozen against the cold, hard wall, a portrait of poised composure that June couldn't help but admire. The guard approached, ready to unlock the first shackle, when suddenly it fell from Garant's wrist with a loud clunk. His eyes bulged with a mixture of confusion and terror that left him dumbfounded. But in the blink of an eye, Garant sprang to life, slipping his hand out of the shackle and lunging towards the guard with the speed of a wild animal. Grabbing the guard's tunic with a death grip, Garant refused to let go, forcing the guard to struggle in vain. The guard reached for his weapon, but Garant was too close, and instead, he cried out for help. "Bloody hell, get him off me!" The guard that was watching June turned around to see Garant very much alive and fighting for his life. Seizing the opportunity, June threw his own shackles over the guard's head, ensnaring him around the neck. The fight was now a 2-on-2 brawl, and June and Garant had the preemptive strike. The guard slammed Garant against the wall, trying to break free, but Garant was too quick for him. While dazed, Garant reached behind his back and pulled out a sharpened lute neck, the perfect weapon for an angry, desperate inmate. He began stabbing the guard over and over again until the guard lay crumpled on the ground, defeated and lifeless. June's guard wasn't going to let his attacker take him down without a scrap. He flailed his arms and legs, fighting with all his might. But as the battle raged on, he began to tire as his knees buckled beneath him. June held his grip as he towered over the struggling guard as he fought a losing battle to gain the upper hand. The scene turned into a bloody mess as Garant climbed to his feet and plunging his shiv into the helpless guard over and over again. In a moment, the room was painted with a dark, crimson hue. June could do nothing to stop his comrade as the final fatal blow was dealt and the guard's lifeless body collapsed to the floor. As both guards lay dead on the floor, dripping blood everywhere, June couldn't handle the gore and turned away, emptying his stomach into the corner. Garant let out a hearty laugh as he fashioned an eye patch out of the tattered cloth of the fallen guard. The adrenaline was still coursing through his veins, but he knew that the worst was behind them. With a swift hand, he snatched the keys from the guard's lifeless body and bolted into the deserted hallway. June was hot on his heels, only taking a moment to pick up his lute shiv as protection. The air was thick with the stench of fear and despair as the echoes of inmates' whimpers reverberated off the walls. With the keys clutched tightly in his fist, he began the daunting task of unlocking cell after cell, freeing the prisoners one by one. Some of the inmates were paralyzed with fear, too frightened to venture out of their confines, but most were eager to seize the chance to escape their nightmarish existence. As the prisoners emerged from their cells, June stopped them in their tracks with a solemn warning. "If you run out there on your own, you're as good as dead. Stay put and wait for our signal." With a grin that stretched from ear to ear, Garrett jangled the keys in his hand as he approached the last cell. The anticipation was thick in the air as the prisoners inside heard the lock click open. And just like that, freedom was theirs for the taking. The hallway was a sea of filthy men as 30 to 40 inmates surged forward, their eyes glinting with excitement. June tried his best to hold them back, but their desire for escape was too strong. The cry of "every man for himself" echoed through the corridor as they stampeded past him, up the stairs and into the fresh air outside. The castle guards sounded the alarm, but it was too late. With every guard brought down by the angry mob, the prisoners removed his weapons, becoming more deadly than before. June looked around, but Garrett was nowhere to be seen. There was no time to waste as he charged up the stairs, only to come face to face with the warden, surrounded by a horde of angry inmates. Years of pent-up rage and unfair treatment boiled in the prisoners' veins, and they took it out on the helpless warden with savage ferocity. One inmate plunged a blade into the back of the warden's leg, and the crowd descended upon him, raining blows upon his helpless form. The metallic grinding of gears filled the air as one of the inmates managed to release the drawbridge. The scene turned from chaos to pandemonium as the inmates sprinted across, their desperation for freedom lending them supernatural speed. It was a race against time, and nothing was going to stop them. June stood alone amidst the blood-soaked ruins of the once immaculate castle, haunted by the ghastly scenes that had unfolded before his very eyes. It had all started with the corpses of 2 guards, but the carnage had quickly escalated until every single defender lay motionless on the ground around him. Despite the overwhelming silence that now filled the air, June couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled deep in his gut. He took a deep breath and began to move forward, being careful to step over the mangled bodies that littered his path. As he drew closer to the dying warden, June felt a sudden surge of anger and sadness. He knelt down beside the man and placed the shattered blade of his beloved lute on the warden's chest. Their eyes met, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. June spoke softly, his voice laced with bitter regret. "You were right. There are no happy endings in this place." The warden's face twisted in pain and anger, but it gave way to a blank stare as his life slipped away. June observed as the light faded from his eyes, his heart heavy with sorrow. Leaving the broken lute behind, June walked across the deserted drawbridge, his steps heavy with the weight of past events. He was free now, but the memory of the bloodshed and the lives lost would haunt him forever.